everyone, this is teacher Maegan and welcome to our course, Purposive Communication. In today's video, we will talk about communication in the 21st century as we focus on the first two lessons of this course, communication principles and models, as well as ethics in communication. So if you want to know more about these topics, please keep on watching. The first part of this course, let me just first give proper credits to the authors of the reference books that I'm going to use in this discussion. Actually, I used two. First is the Purposive Communication book from Mutya Publishing House, and the other one is from the Rex Bookstore. But I would like to give a shout out to my co-teacher in the name of Dr. Orlando Tongonan, because he was the one who gave me the book from Mutya Publishing House, and I used it since last year with the same course, of course. So if you'd like to buy the book that I'm using, you are free to visit those bookstores that I mentioned. So let us start. Chapter 1 is entitled Communication in the 21st Century, and since we are living in this era, it's just right that our discussion will be focusing here. Lesson 1 is about communication principles and models, and at the end of this video lesson, you are expected to learn the following. First is the meaning and importance of communication. Second will be the principles of communication, and last, the communication models. Before we begin, I have here a question that I want you to ponder, because this will prepare you to our discussion. Here goes the question. What role does communication play in your life? Of course, we have different answers for this question because we have different way of living. And I am so excited to hear your answer or to read your answer on the comment section. So let us proceed. For you to easily remember the meaning of communication, I have here the etymology of this word. When we say etymology, this is the origin of the word, wherein it says that communication is derived from two Latin words, communis, meaning commonness, and communicare, meaning to share. Well, sorry if I mispronounce those Latin words. Correct me if I'm wrong. And from that etymology, we can get the idea that communication is about sharing something that is similar. Now let's proceed to its definition. This definition that I got is from businessdictionary.com, wherein it says that communication is a two-way process of reaching mutual understanding in which participants not only exchange information but also create and share meaning. So I want to highlight the two-way process because communication is not just about expressing yourself, but it's also requiring feedback from the person you're talking to. That's why it's a two-way process. It's not enough, or we can't say that you already communicated when you said something without having someone to understand the meaning or the interpretation of your message and giving a feedback to you. And I want you to take note also that communication is possible between two people or more, not just one, because in communication process you will see later that there should be a sender and a receiver, so it cannot be from the same person. Now let's proceed to the principles of communication. Let's try to count these principles. I have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 principles of communication, and each principle has a point that I want you to bear in mind. First is it's a process. So communication involves series of steps that we can jump right away to the last step without undergoing first the initial ones. So it is a process. Second principle, it makes use of symbols. Since we have different types of communication or mode of communication, we could say that in verbal communication, the symbols that we use are the words, but in non-verbal, it's more of the gestures and sign languages. Our next principle is communication is a system. Now, why do you think communication is classified or considered as a system? Do you still remember the systems that we studied when we were in elementary? We have the digestive system, reproductive system, nervous system, circulatory system, and etc. And what are their similarity? Like these systems, how are they similar to the communication? Why is it considered a system as well? Because a system includes different components that without one component, the entire process may be affected or may actually fail. Let's say, for example, in the digestive system, as far as I remember, it starts with the mouth, and then it goes down to our stomach, and then I don't know that much about it. But my point here is, if one component, let's say the mouth, is not present, then the entire process could have been different, or the entire system could have been affected. So that's the same with communication. It has different components, like we have the channel of communication, that if there's a problem with the channel, then the entire process will be affected. Our next principle is communication is dynamic. When we say dynamic, it is changing, and there's no such language that does not change or evolve over time. To explain this further, we have newly invented words. You may also check out my previous video about word formation processes for you to know more about how words are formed. Let's say, for example, the word Google before I mean, when it was just new, we used to think about it as a search engine, wherein this is the source of information that we use. When I was in high school, that's how I perceived Google. But as time goes by, from the noun Google, sometimes it's used as a verb. Hey, Google this, Google that. Before, search it in Google, but now we may use it as a verb already. So that's how it changes. Communication involves meanings. The message that we send can have different interpretations or meanings. That's why it is part of the principle. Next, communication can be intentional or unintentional. It's easier to say that communication is intentional. For example, if you want to ask someone a question, then you do it. Then in the first place, you have set this purpose why you started the communication. That is intentional. However, it is unintentional if your message is received by the wrong receiver. Like, that's not the person you are supposed to be communicating with. This can happen when the message is not clear. For example, a father asks his children to slow down on their spending because he is the sole breadwinner. But when he was discussing that to his kids, the wife overheard the conversation, and she felt bad that probably the reason why her husband rather, said that is because he is already complaining that she's not able to help. So in that case, the communication became unintentional to the wife, who is not supposed to be the receiver, but unintentionally she heard the message of the father. And that is why we say communication can be intentional or unintentional. And lastly, and I think the most important and obvious, communication cannot be avoided. Try to think about it. Have you ever in your life survived a day without communicating with anyone? Because I never. Probably when I was a little, or I mean, when, I don't know, but not until I am able to speak up and to understand meanings. Communication is used for us to survive, and we cannot really survive without having to communicate with people. For example, in our daily living, when we wake up in the morning and ask about the breakfast. We talk to our parents or to our mom who prepared the food, what's our food for today or something like that. And when we go somewhere and use public transportation, you're gonna give your payment or fare to the driver and tell where you're leading. So that's communication also. Next one is the communication models. So there are three models that I am going to present. First is the Aristotelian communication, second is the Shannon-Weaver model of communication, and lastly is Scram's model of communication. I did not have time to research on the pronunciation of the last one. I am not confident, but yeah, I'm willing to learn from you. Just comment down if you know the proper pronunciation of that. So sorry for that. So let's begin with the first model, which is Aristotelian communication. So this Aristotelian communication, I must say, is developed by the famous philosopher Aristotle, and it states that speakers should adjust their messages according to their audience and the occasion to achieve a particular effect. I agree on this model of communication because we do not communicate, we do not have the same way of communication with everyone. Let's say the way we communicate with children is far different from the way we communicate with our colleagues and the people who are, let's say, higher in position. Second, and our focus is the Shannon-Weaver model, and this is sometimes called the telephone model because it includes the element of noise or the barrier of the message, be it physical, psychological, and by the way, we're going to discuss the different barriers of communication in our next video. So for now, let's have this Shannon-Weaver model that includes different components, and this is also called the telephone model because of the presence of the element of noise or the barrier in communication. And lastly, the Scram's model of communication that explains how the encoding and decoding of a message is not automatic and goes through the filter of the interpreter. Further models also explain how communication also depends on a common field of experience between the sender and the receiver. So in this model of communication, the focus are the two individuals, the sender and the receiver, wherein of course the sender is the encoder or the one who started the conversation, and then the interpreter here is the one who receives or the receiver in the process. So in the next slide, we will have the Shannon-Weaver model of communication because, as I said earlier, our focus is this one. So in this model, you are seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 components. First is the sender because it starts the conversation. Without the sender to begin the conversation, then there will be no communication process. By the way, this model of communication is the best way to explain the entire process of communication. Again, the process, it begins with the sender who does the encoding. When we say encoding or the encoder of the message, just like how we encode words, phrases, paragraphs using our laptop. Like our idea starts from our mind and then we encode it into the MS Word, and meaning to say from the ideas, we put our ideas into words. So that's how I explain the encoding process. Upon encoding the message passes through a channel, so it will be able to reach the receiver. But before reaching its destination, there is this process first that the receiver does, which is the decoding process. So this is the opposite of encoding, because if encoding is a process of putting ideas into words, in decoding there are already words, or there is already the message, And this is now turning the message into ideas, or shortly or simply, decoding is the interpretation of the received message. So, upon reaching the destination, of course, the receiver, after comprehending the message delivered by the sender, the receiver will send a feedback to the sender, or a reply. So it could be his opinion or answer if that's a query, and that is in a form of feedback. Now, if the receiver already gave a feedback to the sender, since communication is a two-way process, the receiver is no longer the receiver here, but he or she becomes the sender, because he or she sends a message back to the original source of information. You got it? Now, in the channel, you are seeing this lightning symbol behind, and this symbol represents the noise or the barrier of communication. Now, in the previous slide, it says that the noise can be physical or psychological, but as I mentioned, there are more types of barrier or noise of communication, not just the physical or psychological. During the process of transmitting the message to the destination, to the receiver, there could be barriers, and the common barrier here is the noise. Let's say you are talking to someone that is a little far or distant from you, and it's too noisy outside. Now, there are two barriers in the situation that I already mentioned. First is the noise, because it's too noisy. You may not be able to understand exactly what is said by the sender because of the noise, and that is a barrier. And the other one is the distance. So, physical. Those are physical barriers. Again, the model that I discussed is Shannon Weaver's model of communication, which starts from the sender, and then it's the message of the sender is being encoded, and it passes through a channel until it reaches its destination, who is the receiver, and it is the receiver who understands and interprets the message, and the receiver gives a feedback to the sender, and with that, the receiver becomes the sender of the message, and the original source of the information is no longer the sender but the receiver of the feedback. To end this lesson, let me leave you a question. What problems can happen when there are communication breakdowns? Now, this question is for me to prepare you, class, for our next topic, which is about the communication breakdowns or communication barriers. Alright, that concludes my discussion for the first chapter of this course. I hope you learned something from me today and you enjoyed our lesson. And if you did, please don't forget to click the like buttons and share this video. See you next time. Bye!